Hey there, welcome to A Fistful of Dice. My name is Matt, and welcome back to another episode of Memoirs of a Dungeon Master. In this episode, we talk about the Corruptor. If you follow the Provokers campaign at all, you might be familiar with the character of the Corruptor. The Corruptor is the main antagonist in that campaign. He's a villain who has been harrying the heroes since Session 1. They first squared off against him in Session 3. They fought him again in Session 7 or 8. He's been a constant presence in my homebrew world of Arendelle, and he's a fairly important character, not just for his evil deeds as the Corruptor, but also as his great deeds of courage and heroism as the man known as Arendelle Dawnbringer. I can talk about this now because in the last episode of the Provokers, Session 12, we revealed quite a bit of the Corruptor's backstory, who he was, why he became the Corruptor. We don't necessarily know what made him the Corruptor, but we do know what spurred him to turn to darkness. Before we jump into the Corruptor, I want to talk a little bit about inspiration. Because the Corruptor is kind of a mishmash of different inspirations. I've always been really drawn to tragic, fallen heroes. There's just something about it that really appeals to me. Someone whose penchant for good ultimately led them to do bad. It might be that they did bad things in an attempt to do good. It might be that they turned bad because no matter what they did, no matter how virtuous or honorable or loyal they were, they couldn't stop evil without becoming evil themselves. I think the best example of this is Anakin Skywalker, Darth Vader, from the Star Wars franchise. Darth Vader was once a Jedi called Anakin Skywalker, who was one of the finest Jedi in the galaxy, if you believe Obi-Wan Kenobi. If you watch the prequels, that's not so evident, but in any case, Anakin was a good person, a kind-hearted person, someone who cared for his friends and his family, who was loyal, who was brave, who was strong, who was capable and powerful, and ultimately was misled and misguided and fell to the dark side. And he was horribly maimed, physically scarred, imprisoned inside a suit, barely recognizable. And he became known as Darth Vader, many in the galaxy not even knowing that he was once Anakin Skywalker. Another character who immediately sticks out to me as being an inspiration for the Corruptor is Arthas from the Warcraft franchise. Prince Arthas was a paladin. He served under Uther Lightbringer. He was a brave and courageous young man, royal blood, and he made some tough decisions to try and save his kingdom. And ultimately, he succumbed to a dark and ancient power that grabbed hold of his conscience and his spirit and used his body as a vessel. And so all of that strength and all of that courage that Arthas had was ultimately twisted and used for vile purposes, and he became the Lich King. There's that Nietzsche quote from Beyond Good and Evil. It's a quote that is used in the game Baldur's Gate. And when I was a kid, I played this game Baldur's Gate and Baldur's Gate 2, and I remember seeing this quote come up on the screen before the opening cinematic of Baldur's Gate and just thinking, how cool is that? How evocative. The quote is, "He who fights with monsters should look to it that he himself does not become a monster. For when you gaze long into an abyss, the abyss also gazes into you." that quote, for me, perfectly sums up the Corruptor, the character of the Corruptor, and the character of Arendelle before he became the Corruptor. The idea is that you can't fight evil. You cannot face demons and darkness and vile things without confronting those things, without confronting their reflections within yourself. When you gaze long into an abyss, the abyss also gazes into you. And I like this idea. I like this idea that someone so noble and good could become so bad. And what would lead them to do that? I was planning a game of 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons. The game had just come out, and I was gathering a group together, the group that would become the Provokers. There are originally 5 members, by the way. That's an interesting fact that not many people know. But I started designing the session that I wanted to do, and it was a one-shot session. It was intended to be a one-shot session. But I wanted to utilize this new idea that I had had. And the idea is not a new idea in the sense that it's unique. It's a new idea for my world of Aeronoth. But it kind of made everything click into place for Aeronoth. The idea was the Convocation. And the Convocation are sort of like the Jedi Knights of Aeronoth. They are men and women of great strength and courage who forge an alliance, a bond with the griffins of these floating isles called Eros. And they ride on these griffins, and they sort of police Aeronoth. They see to conflicts between kingdoms. They deal with great threats like dragons, demons, and that sort of thing. They're the special forces, the UN special forces of Aeronoth. And I like the idea of, what was essentially samurai on griffins. And so I wanted to do a session involving the Convocation somehow. And I was looking at a piece of art by Frank Frazetta. And it's a fairly iconic piece of art. You probably have seen it, even if you're not super into Frank Frazetta. It's this dark piece. There's fire in the background, vultures swirling in the sky, and there's a dark, shadowy man on a giant horse, like a Clydesdale. He's wearing a horned helm, and he has red glowing eyes that are peeking out from under a helmet, and he's holding a bloody axe. The title of this painting is Death Dealer. And it's one of my favorite Frazetta pieces. I just think it's a really evocative piece of art. It's always inspired me. I've always really dug it. And I was looking at this piece of art, and I was thinking about the Convocation, and I was thinking about this session I was going to run. And I decided I wanted to do a convoker, a member of the Convocation, who had turned bad. A Jedi who would turn to the dark side, essentially. So I started developing this character. And he immediately took on the qualities of Arthas from Warcraft. I imagined him being very tall, very broad, very strong, and sort of beautiful. Long blonde hair, very sharp, fine features, strong jaw. Just a very handsome, charismatic, and capable person. Someone difficult to dislike if you knew him. I started thinking about this character, who I named Arendelle, Dawnbringer. And I started thinking about the great deeds that he had accomplished. Maybe he had slain a dragon. Maybe he had toppled a tyrant. Maybe he was well known and well respected among the Convocation and elsewhere. Maybe he was a hero. And then I started thinking about what would drive him to go bad. And I decided it couldn't just be one thing. It couldn't be a single moment that would snap something in him. It had to be a gradual thing. It had to be a wearing down, like a sandpaper just kind of taking off the top layer of Arendelle and exposing, that abyss that we were talking about earlier. So I decided that Arendelle was involved in a war. And so I started thinking about what kind of war would the Convocation need to get involved in. Because ultimately they don't want to get involved in a war between two sovereign kingdoms. It's, of course, the right of kingdoms to war with one another, to use combat as a way to distribute wealth and land and power. That's how things are kind of done. And it's not worth it for the Convocation to intervene between two kingdoms who are going to war for a few months and then stop. It sort of keeps the balance. One kingdom gets too big, they strike out against the other ones, they get beaten back down. Or vice versa. One kingdom gets weak and the others converge on it, divvying up the land and the population. It's just sort of the way of things in Arenoth. Like a survival of the fittest type thing. But in deciding that the Convocation was sort of like the UN special forces, they would have to intervene if there was some sort of human rights violations going on, for lack of a better phrase. Something happening that was not within the bounds of a war between domains. Not simply knights rushing at each other across a battlefield. Whichever side wins gets, a few acres of land. It would have to be widespread and it would have to be devastating. And so I looked back in the history of Arenoth, and I looked back at my Sundered Throne campaign, a Pathfinder campaign that I never finished, but it was a fun campaign to run. And in that campaign, the PCs were responsible for reseeding the lost heir of a kingdom known as Karn, which is a kingdom in the far north of Arenoth. And Karn had been plagued by civil war, all of the lords kind of warring with one another, and the neighboring kingdoms kind of trying to eke their way in and take what they could, because Karn was rich with minerals and resources, being so close to the Anvil Mountains. But ultimately, this man that they put in power would seize an opportunity to restore Karn to its former glory. And being half-blooded, this man would join forces with the elves of a forest called Alfheim. He's a half-elf. His father was the former king of Karn, but his mother was an elf of Alfheim. And so he's able to broker an alliance between the kingdom of Karn and the Wood Elves of Alfheim. And he creates what's called the Karn Confederacy. And he strikes out. This guy, Talgrin Grey, is his name. So Talgrin takes this massive force that he's mustered, all of the lords of Karn who have been warring for decades, who know war better than anyone else. And he unites them. He musters their bannermen and he unites them with the elves of Alfheim, and he strikes out at the other northern kingdoms. And he starts winning decisively, quickly. He starts slaughtering people. And the war goes on for years, and the kingdoms of Talmor, and the kingdoms of Bardoth, and the kingdoms of Krieg, and Torlin, all kind of reach out to the Convocation for help, for aid. Because even united, they can't stand against this confederacy, this threat from the north that they never saw coming. And so the Convocation intervenes in this war called the War of the Broken North. And so Arendelle Dawnbringer, you remember him? We were talking about him. Arendelle Dawnbringer, this established convoker, he is instrumental in this war. He fights in this war for years with his friend Emery Suresteel. And Arendelle and Emery are involved in many major battles, and with the aid of the Convokers and their magic and their strength and their power, the United Kingdoms of the North manage to push the Karn Confederacy back, and they start winning. They start winning back territory, and they start pushing the army back. Now here's where we get to the part where Arendelle starts slipping a little bit. The idea was that Arendelle was getting weary, that he didn't feel like all of this war, all of these petty squabbles that left innocents dead, that spilled innocent blood in exchange for the satisfaction of nobles, that it was a waste, that Aeronath belonged to no man, and that it should be a free place. And so Arendelle goes into this war with some reservations, but he goes into it nonetheless because he is a loyal man and he follows orders. And so Arendelle witnesses plenty of horrors of war, of course, as he's seen combat before, but the greatest horror comes not from the Karn Confederacy that everyone has come to fear, it comes from the Convocation. For reasons that are still kind of unclear to the general population, the ruling council of the Convocation, an organization called the Synod, orders all Convokers to burn Alfheim as the Confederacy retreats back through it. The idea being that they needed a decisive victory to keep Karn from rising up again in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. And so the Convokers set fire to Alfheim, to the Elven Wood, as the elves and humans of Karn fled and retreated back through them. And the idea is that Arendelle was circling through the black pillars of smoke, and he was smelling the burning flesh, and he was hearing the screams of dying men and women. And as he saw this beautiful northern forest, these great, massive, ancient trees called dire oaks cracking and splitting and toppling, that he saw what Aeronath, the people of Aeronath, the rulers of Aeronath were capable of. And he saw what the Convocation was capable of. And it wasn't something that he liked. Following the War of the Broken North, Arendelle left the Convocation. He left without orders. He essentially broke his vow and left. He said that he was feeling a pull from the far south. And so he goes down there and he goes with Emery. And Arendelle and Emery treat with the savage tribes down there in the southern marshlands. And they keep hearing stories of this guy called the Corruptor. And it's a mythical figure, a messiah for the raiders of Gavalt. A great horned god who will appear before them and strike down the puny gods of the north and reclaim all of the land that was taken from the people of Gavalt, who used to be the people of Kazran, those still loyal to Emperor Asmundr prior to the Great Scorching. So they keep hearing about this Corruptor, and they decide that whoever this Corruptor is, he needs to be stopped. And so they keep searching, and they're down there for years, treating with the tribes, delving into ruins, researching, trying to find out who is this Corruptor. And they finally find this tunnel deep in the wilds, in the darkest heart of the Gavalt wilds. An ancient temple older than the Kazran Empire, maybe 10,000 years old, still standing. The architecture, the style of it, unlike anything either of them have ever seen. And so they go into this temple, and there's an entity waiting for them there. Now, we're not super clear on what that entity is, but the prevailing theory is that it's an old god. The energy of something left over from an ancient, distant age of Arenoth. And this entity wished to gain influence again in Arenoth. But it needed someone willing. It needed someone strong. The entity needed someone who was capable of harnessing the power of an old god and wielding it like a weapon against the rulers of Arenoth. And Arendelle, this hero, this legend, survivor of hundreds of battles, feller of dragons, slayer of demons, toppler of tyrants, Arendelle sees his opportunity to unseat those tyrants, to end the petty squabbles between nobles once and for all, and to ultimately prove that Arenoth belongs to no man. And so Arendelle lets this entity in. He allows it to take hold, and he gains its power. And Arendelle becomes what he has been searching for. He becomes the Corruptor, the fabled messiah of the savages of Gavald. And at this point, Emery is like, no. He's been going along with Arendelle to keep tabs on his friend because he sees that Arendelle is losing it. He sees that Arendelle is slipping, just grasping at straws looking for answers. And when this happens, Emery knows that Arendelle is long gone, and he tries to stop him. He tries to stop him at first as a friend, and then eventually swords are drawn, and a great battle commences above the temple on Griffin back. And they battle for a long time, but there's something different about Arendelle, and he has a strength and a ferocity and an aggression that he certainly didn't have before. He lops Emery's arm off, unseats him from his griffin, and fatally wounds the beast. So Emery falls for thousands and thousands of feet, and if it wasn't for his griffin putting itself underneath him and cushioning his fall as they hit the ground thousands of feet below, Emery would certainly be dead. From there, Arendelle, now known as the Corruptor, leads a bloody crusade across the Gavalt wilds and unites the tribes. Any who don't submit, he kills or conscripts into his legions. And within a couple of years, he has an enormous army at his back. A few years later, he marches on the Western Southlands. And soon after that, he encounters the Provokers for the first time. So the Corruptor and Arendelle are effectively two different characters, but they're the same man. And I kind of like that idea. And I like the idea that the Provokers, the player characters, have spent 12 sessions hating this man. They've seen him do terrible things, kill thousands of people. He's sort of following them at every turn. But then they find out that he's just a man. They knock his helmet loose and they see his face and they see there's no demon underneath, there's no monster, there's no tentacled eldritch horror. It's just a man. A weary-looking human man who may have once been very handsome and very charming, very charismatic, a leader. And it's easy to just call him the Corruptor. But at one point, he was Arendelle. I think the thing that I like most about the character of Arendelle is that initially I thought, well, maybe his wife and his kid are killed in the War of the Broken North. But I thought that was a little too obvious. I thought that was a little too... I don't know. It just seemed too easy to me. And so I decided that, no, he didn't have a wife and a kid that died. It was merely that he did something that he regrets more than anything else. And he would do anything to prevent that from happening again. But in doing so, he's doing just that. Arendelle became the Corruptor because, well, primarily he was forced to burn a forest to the ground and kill thousands of people. And now he's just cutting a burning path through the Western Southlands doing that very same thing. But his vision, his perspective is so clouded by hate and so clouded by this dark entity that has taken hold in him that he doesn't recognize that. Or if he does, he realizes that it's a necessary step. Now, a lot of people have asked me, what's the Corruptor's endgame? Why does he want to get to the city of Falhast? And I know why, and we're going to find out. I will say this. The Corruptor isn't trying to get to Falhast. He's trying to get past it. Anyway, guys, that's going to be it from me. Take care, and happy gaming all.